Welcome everyone to today's webinar hosted by ECIS. It's so great to see so many of you here today. I know we've got representation from all over the world, with a particularly large amount of you coming from Japan. So welcome all. We'll be sharing a recording of today's webinar, and there will be an opportunity at the end to ask questions via the chat box. So please make sure you do, when you click the chat, make sure you're writing to all attendees and panelists so our panelists can see the questions. ECS are the founding member of the International Task Force for Child Protection, and we uphold the group's standards for child protection. We are delighted to be partnering with MyConcern for today's webinar, Safer Recruitment in International Schools, Learning Lessons from Serious Case Reviews. Please let me introduce our experts for today. Sarah Jensmantel. Sarah recently joined the safeguarding team as a safeguarding trainer and is also currently studying to be a counsellor. Sarah's background is in independent schools where she has worked as a head of safeguarding and boarding. Sarah has over 10 years experience working with children from all different backgrounds, children with specific needs and from different cultures. And next we have Liz Hood. Liz, originally coming from a background in education as a secondary music teacher. Liz has also gained a postgraduate diploma in counselling and psychotherapy. Since completing her studies, she has continued to work with Women's Aid and New Pathways, counselling individuals that have experienced domestic and sexual violence. Liz's specialities include mental health support, increasing well-being within the workplace, and working with individuals who have experienced trauma. Safeguarding has always been prevalent throughout her career, underpinning the services that she has provided for establishments working with both children and adults. As part of the safeguarding team, she is responsible for creating content and delivering a wide range of training support to MyConcern customers. Please join me in welcoming and handing over to Sarah and Liz. Thank you both.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody, or possibly good morning to some of you also. Just to reiterate everything that Joanne said, so thank you so much for joining us today. So I think Joanne did a great introduction there in terms of explaining a little bit about myself. So I've got over between 10 and 12 years experience working with state and independent schools. A majority of that time has been working on the safeguarding team, acting as a DSL and the central point of expertise and knowledge with safeguarding. So yeah, I think Joanne summed that up quite nicely. Today I'm presenting with my colleague Liz Hood, who shortly she'll introduce herself as well. So as you know, safer recruitment is such a huge subject, but we are hoping today that that we will be able to offer you some guidance and some practical tips that you can take away with you. As we go through the webinar, if at any point you do have a comment or question that you'd like to raise, please do feel free to put it in the chat box like Joanne explained, and we will look to answer as many questions as we can today as we go through the webinar. If we are unable to do that, we will obviously make sure that we do answer the questions and that they will be sent to you in due course. So thank you again so much for joining us today. So I'll pass over to Liz.
Yeah, of course. All right, so good day, everybody. I'm Liz Hood, and Joe did a really thorough background about me. That I used to work in education, in secondary education, for about 4 years, and I was the head of a music department, and I was one of the only teachers that used to see most of the children that were aged 11 to 14, and because of that, I've had a really close relationship with safeguarding and well-being, and since that time then, I have become a therapist. Okay, so what I thought we could do now is just quickly turn our cameras off and then we'll make a start. And this is just so that you're able to fully concentrate on the slides. Okay, so I'd like to start today by talking about some statistics, and we're going to be covering several different areas across the world. So I'll start off with Africa and Asia. So these are among the regions with the highest rates of child sexual abuse, known as CSA, in the world. And they also share the highest proportion of children under 18, with Asia alone accounting for 24% of children under 14 years of age. And about 41% of the African population are under the age of 15. Despite the magnitude of the problem, few studies have been investigated into CSA in these regions, and that does limit the appropriate and timely response that is possible. Then moving on to discuss Africa. So violence, abuse and exploitation of children in West and Central Africa are tragic aspects of childhood. Surveys show that the vast majority of children experience violent discipline. Nearly 1 in 3 teenage girls have been beaten or hit since the age of 15, and 1 in 10 have been raped or sexually abused. And then we have child marriage, which is a serious violation of children's rights. And that affects 4 in 10 girls aged 20 to 24 who were married before their 18th birthday. The region also has a quarter of all girl victims of female genital mutilation and cutting, and the highest rate of teenage pregnancy in the world. So then moving on to Asia, so from 68 studies, we estimated that 26.6% of children under 18 years of age have suffered physical abuse, 19.6% have suffered emotional abuse, 8.7% sexual abuse, and 26% neglect. Then in Europe, 1 in 5 children in Europe are victims of some form of sexual violence. And it's estimated that in 70 to 85% of cases, the abuser is somebody that the child knows and trusts. So the phenomena of missing children has many links to sexual abuse and exploitation. Between 2012 and 2018, at least 160 professionals in UK boarding schools had been charged with carrying out sexual assaults. And it's estimated that at least 1 in 7 children in the US has experienced child abuse or neglect in the past year. So with these statistics, it's shocking to know that 2 years is the minimum time offenders are listed on the registry in the UK. Only 15% of countries have a sex offender registry laws, and period offenders in Taiwan are only listed on the registry for a period of 5 to 7 years. So I'm really keen to know if any of these statistics shocked you. If they did, please feel very welcome to pop in the chat box and share your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I think these statistics really, do set the scene for this webinar today. And, they show us why safer recruitment is so important. So just before we do move on, we'd just like to run with you just a quick poll, and this will just give us a better understanding as to who we have that's joined us today, where you're from in the world, and just to get an idea about your knowledge of safer recruitment. So if you could, if you have the, if you're able to, submit your answers, could you let me know, are you based in an international British school? If you're unable to do this, please do pop your answer in the chat box if you're unable to submit your answers. Oh, okay. The question also are, where are you in the world? And then there should be a question, awareness of safer recruitment.
I'll launch that one after these two.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, brilliant. We have had one of the messages that mentions that a delegate is in an international school but does not follow the British curriculum. Oh. Okay, thank you for that response, actually, and expanding on that. It was really helpful.
Yeah, so okay, so we've got, the answers are coming through. So we have around 61% that are not. Okay, so this is going to be really helpful in terms of understanding how the UK system works and the things that we've obviously put in place here. Okay, so we've got a really high population of Asia and within Europe, which is really, really good. Some in Africa and North America as well. Oh, fantastic. Joanne, are you able to release the second poll now, please?
Yeah, I will now launch the second poll.
Thank you.
I can see a few responses that I believe might be related to that second, that last final question today. I can see one delegate's mentioned being in an international schools company and they are experienced. There's one other that has mentioned being quite new as a safeguarding leader.
Oh, fantastic. You can see some coming in now, actually, that we've got around half being new to safer recruitment. So I think it's going to be really beneficial that you've attended today, and some experience. Some have around 38-40% of safer recruitment, and then we've got around about 15% that are very experienced in safer recruitment. A nice balance today. So again, as we go through the course, through the webinar, if you do want to share any anything that you would like us to share with everybody, then please again do put them in the chat box there.
Thanks. So just a quick note from me. If you want to, you'll have to minimise your polls for them to disappear. Thanks all.
Fantastic. So thank you for that. Thank you for participating in the poll. So Liz, you know, thinking about safer recruitment, why is it so important here in the UK and internationally?
Thanks for asking that question, Sarah. I think it's a hugely important question. And we're going to be answering this in part using series case reviews. So we are going to begin with this one today. So Holly and Jessica, who in 2002 were just 10 years old when they were murdered in Soham by Ian Huntley. Now, this is a really shocking case, and it forced a focus on safer recruitment. A public inquiry was held into the intelligence-based record-keeping and vetting system, which had allowed Huntley to obtain employment as a school caretaker. Huntley had had criminal complaints from being domineering, violent, and controlling, to an established record of consensual and non-consensual sexual activities with females, many beneath the legal age of consent. How had Huntley been able to gain employment at a school when these criminal complaints had been reported to both police and social services? It was the Bishard inquiry which recommended the implementation of a mandatory registration scheme for people working with children and vulnerable adults. And it was in these findings that also suggested a national system should be implemented for police forces to share intelligence information. The Police National Database is now in use across the UK today, providing police with the ability to share intelligence and not just criminal convictions from the Police National Computer. So we're going to continue now to discuss two more serious case reviews that reached international attention due to the calculated and prolific nature of the crimes that were committed. So Sarah, if you wouldn't mind introducing the serious case review of William Vahe.
Yeah, absolutely. So William Vahe was born in California and was convicted early in his career of sex offences towards young boys, and this was whilst working as a teacher's aide. He was charged in 1969 with lewd and salacious behaviour, and this was for molesting boys as young as 7 while teaching them how to swim. He pleaded guilty and told his probation officer he was repelled and humiliated by his actions, and admitted that he'd started touching boys when he was just 14 years old. In 1970, Vahe was released from jail after serving a 90-day sentence for child molestation, and he was placed on the sex offenders register, which required him to tell authorities whenever he changed address. However, he didn't do this, and the authorities failed to keep tabs on him. So we are now just going to play you a very quick video about the struggles that the FBI have faced in gathering information about the crimes that Vahe has committed. And this was due to the different schools around the world that he worked in and the key moments when his criminal history did not accompany him into those schools.
Okay, so I'm just going to press play.
In the 1973 yearbook of the Tehran American School, the teacher so many knew and trusted as Mr. Vahe, now revealed to be a paedophile who abused that trust for years. Investigators are now picking through William Vahe's past, trying to establish just who he abused in a career that took him around the world. Images of between 50 and 60 pupils at London's South Bank International School were found on Vahe's computer drive. It was when the FBI got their hands on that drive and went to court to obtain a search warrant that Vahe took his own life in a motel room. Agents now leading the search for Vahe's victims say they've rarely seen abuse on this scale.
Without a doubt, this is certainly one of the most prolific suspected sexual predators that we've seen, given the numbers of children, potential victims, his position of trust, and so forth, and some of the allegations and the methods that are being alleged that he may have employed while committing these crimes. And we're going to continue on with the ongoing investigation. Just because the suspect chose to not face justice doesn't mean the FBI is going to stop seeking justice.
For parents of pupils taught by Vahe around the world, these are agonizing times.
We know there's a lot more fallout to come, and I think that's what we're dreading. It's what comes next, because the pictures only go back so far. We don't know, are there other pictures that are going to be coming out? Whose children are on those pictures? My heart goes out to them as a mother.
In interviews, Vahe said he gave his victims sleeping pills, so many may not even know they were abused. The FBI says it believes that abuse could date back decades. It was here in California that Vahi began what was to become decades of child abuse. His conviction for child molestation here in 1970 as a 20-year-old swimming coach should have put him on the sex offenders register for life. That it didn't, that risk he posed wasn't highlighted, remains one of the big questions in this case. Just because Vahi chose not to face justice, investigators say, they won't stop seeking it. Greg Milam, Sky News, Los Angeles.
So how I experienced that video is I found it extremely shocking, and I think it really demonstrates how effective information sharing at the beginning of his career, it could have prevented decades of abuse. And I'm really interested to see how you found that also. So again, please feed back to us if you'd like to let us know. So on this slide, we can see a list of all the schools that Vahi went on to work after his initial sentence. And one of the most shocking elements to this review is that the fact that Vahi's crimes were only discovered due to his housekeeper stealing a flash drive containing over 90 photos of over 90 unconscious adolescent boys that were either naked or partially dressed. And after handing it into the latest school that he worked in Nicaragua, the FBI subsequently sought for a search warrant to allow them to open that flash drive. In the review, a comment was made that Vahi was hiding in plain sight, as Vahi went undetected for so long, despite displaying behaviours such as altering accommodation arrangements of pupils on school trips, insisting on having keys to the pupils' rooms, as well as making comments to pupils of a very sexual nature. After being interviewed, Vahi admitted to the decades of offences, and when the news story broke, several ex-colleagues finally came forward and shared how controlling, ill-tempered and suspicious Vahi was, but how they felt they could not progress further with their concerns because of his wife's powerful status as the head of European Council for International Schools. Vahi committed suicide in Minnesota on the 21st of March 2014, but police continued to investigate this case in order to prevent such a prolific case from being allowed to happen again. So the series case review of Vahi really uncovered how many chances were missed to investigate his behaviour, with colleagues feeling unwilling or unable to speak out about their concerns. And I think this really does go to show why policies are so important in giving everybody that clarity over what they can do if they're concerned about a colleague or another adult. And there were several other recommendations that came from the report. One included exploring the 4 key areas common amongst those who abuse children in professional settings. So during the interview process of new applicants, so these questions can seek to find awareness and observation of professional boundaries, appropriateness of relationships with children, commitment to and evidence taking action to protect, and then also self-awareness. Another recommendation was to ensure that schools implement a full debriefing section into their school trip policies, as several instances of abuse occurred during those school trips which were not picked up on due to the lack of discussion once staff and pupils returned to school. Okay, Sarah, would you like to tell us about the series case review of Richard Huckle?
Yeah, absolutely. So moving on to this case, Richard Hucknall is known as one of Britain's worst predatory paedophiles. Hucknall targeted, groomed and abused up to 200 Malaysian babies and children by sharing images of his horrific crimes, also on the dark web. Huckle, aged 30, was a photographer from Ashford in Kent and posed as an English teacher and a philanthropist in poor Christian communities in Kuala Lumpur. For nearly a decade, Hucknall travelled around Southeast Asia, visiting schools and orphanages. And once established, he would take the most vulnerable children out on day trips and abuse them. Huckle admitted an unprecedented 71 offences, these including rapes against young children aged between just 6 months old and 12 years. And this was from 2006 until his arrest in 2014. The actual number is believed to be much higher, as officers found a scoreboard on his computer in which he awarded himself marks for abusing 191 boys and girls. At the time of his arrest, he was also compiling a manual to teach fellow paedophiles how to abuse children and avoid detection. He had even bragged online how it was easier to target impoverished children in Malaysia than those from wealthy Western backgrounds, having abused some of his victims for years before his arrest. At his trial in 2016, he was handed 22 life sentences for his crimes, but was murdered in his jail cell by a fellow inmate in 2019. We are now going to watch another short video clip, and which this shows an interview with one of the survivors of Huckle's abuse.
My grandmother told me to be careful around him. I didn't understand what she was saying until he started coming to the house. I met him in a church. He started talking to my mother there. And then he started coming to the house to talk to her. That's what I remember. He took videos of me naked, and I told him I wanted to go home to my mom. I was scared and couldn't do anything. I got scared every time he took me out. He started taking photos of me from the time I was 3 years old. He showed me photos of myself and then photos of my sister, and I got angry. They were photos that showed our nude bodies, that kind of photos.
How do you feel about him now?
I don't want him to come back to Malaysia. I want him in prison forever.
So one of the things that I think that video really demonstrated was how Huckle managed to manipulate those around him to gain access and control over his victims. And I think it was really clear from that video and from the previous slide that he was a calculating person, and he planned not only how to conduct the abuse, but how to continue. And he did that by placing himself in a position of authority over children. A key failing in this serious case review was that there was a significant lack of communication between agencies in the UK and overseas. The National Crime Agency, which was criticised by Malaysian authorities for failing to alert them early enough of Huckle's crimes, admitted that it was first told about his offending in August 2014, but they didn't have enough evidence to present to Malaysian police for another 3 months. Huckle's arrest finally took place in Gatwick Airport during the Christmas period of 2014 after a tip-off from Australian investigators. And the learning from this serious case review is that, similarly to Vahi, there needs to be a cohesive global effort to share information about potential paedophiles, given that, as we have learned today, paedophiles may use travelling as a means of concealing their criminal history and to continue abusing. And schools are in a fantastic position to proactively deter these individuals from being employed at their school by requiring proof of identity, any required criminal checks, and contacting authorities in countries that they have lived in to ensure that there's no unknown criminal history. So Sarah, would you mind then just talking us through how safer recruitment can really help us to keep children safe?
Yeah, well, safer recruitment is a method of designing your recruitment process to deter people like Huckle and Vahe from applying for roles with vulnerable groups and to identify and reject them if they do. The hard truth is that unsuitable individuals like Ian Huntley can exist in any job role, including in voluntary and care positions. Additionally, abusers are often skilled at hiding their intentions and behaviour, and they may regard your job advertisement as their chance to access vulnerable people. Both children and vulnerable adults have the right to live free from harm, and therefore one of your most important responsibilities is to ensure that unsuitable individuals are not allowed to work with vulnerable groups. And this is the role of safer recruitment.
Okay, so what you can see on this slide is a model that was developed to help just really help identify the general process of a person who becomes a perpetrator of sexual abuse. So since Finkelhor first began developing this model in the 80s, tremendous progress has been made in understanding the characteristics and motivations behind sexually abusing children. However, it's really sadly evident that more work needs to be done, as many bodies of evidence suggest that a lot of the abuse is still not reported. One of the most significant aspects of Finkelhor's work is challenging the stereotypes surrounding child abusers. Such stereotyping has often allowed perpetrators to continue abusing for longer. For an example, abusers cannot be upstanding citizens of the community, and those who have likable personalities in day-to-day life cannot possibly be an abuser. So there are four preconditions to child sexual abuse and a process that perpetrators move through. So firstly, we have on the left the development of a motivation to abuse. Much research is still ongoing to develop an understanding of how individuals begin to develop the motivation to abuse children, as it's important that assumptions are not made. And Finkelhor himself, he was very careful to point out the likelihood of a combination of individual factors for each perpetrator becoming motivated to abuse. And then next, we have the overcoming of conscience. So this stage is generally described as where the perpetrator is aware that their motivations are wrong, but creates internal justifications to the point where they feel able to move on to the next stage. And how long a perpetrator stays in this stage, it depends on many things, one of them being having psychopathic tendencies. So Vahi and Hunkel, they would have likely gone through those first two stages to internally justify their actions. Sarah, can you explain the next stage, which is where they now begin to plan how to conduct the abuse?
Yeah, absolutely. So the next stage is looking at their avoidance or manipulation of potential protectors. And this is termed external inhibitors. And as with all four stages, this stage can really vary significantly in length. So research has shown that very few perpetrators act in an opportunistic way. So, for example, waiting in a dark alleyway, in the, with the chance that they see somebody on their own. And most perpetrators do spend a significant time grooming both the victim and even people surrounding the victim. And these can be family members or members of the community. And this stage is very significant, as a perpetrator can build a real strong reputation as an upstanding citizen and an all-round good person. And with this, it can be really difficult for people to imagine the abuse that they plan to do. So this subsequently allows them to continue to abuse for longer. And then we come to the final stage, which is the grooming and the actual abuse of the child victim. So once the abuse has begun, many perpetrators will continue to manipulate situations so that it can continue. So, for example, organising school trips, and this is what we learned, looking at the series case review of William Varhey. So this bodywork has really strengthened our understanding of how to deter abuse from occurring, as understanding the mindset of the perpetrator can really help in counteracting their attempts to move from one stage to another. So by going through these two series case reviews of Varhey and Huckel, we have demonstrated real life examples of how perpetrators can move through this model. So now we've done this and we've looked at those. Liz, can you now start by taking us through the recruitment process?
Yeah, of course I can. Schools and colleges, they have a legal responsibility to do whatever they can to stop dangerous people from gaining access to their pupils and students. And this means thoroughly checking the suitability and backgrounds of all staff and making sure that any volunteers, contractors and visitors are also appropriately checked or supervised. So while the nature of international schools, international education, it means the frequency and types of safeguarding concerns may be very different to those of other schools, we do still need to be vigilant to ensure the quality of record keeping for safeguarding is an accurate reflection of what is really happening in the school and at home. And safe recruitment is all about the appointment process. It's a really effective first step in keeping unsuitable people away from children and vulnerable adults. And it's a crucial part of the safeguarding process in general. And it covers everything from writing up the job description through to shortlisting, doing checks and references, interviewing and using induction and probationary periods just to make sure you've hired the right person. And in this section, we'll briefly look at the background to safe recruitment, including the relevant laws and policies and procedures that you'll need to have. So Sarah, can you touch on the 3 stages of recruitment?
Yeah, absolutely. So 3 stages to safer recruitment is the first stage is to deter. So this is to stop unsuitable people applying for a position. So it means sending out clear messages in your job adverts and application information. So telling those potential applicants that you have a rigorous recruitment process in place, and this is to screen out unsuitable candidates. And this should make sure that inappropriate people are put off by applying in the first place. And the next stage is to identify and reject. So unsuitable people do lie to get close to children, as we know. So the details that they give must be checked and that they can be persistent. So during the interview, you still need to check, cross-reference and screen applicants carefully by asking incisive questions just to clarify anything that you're concerned about. And finally, the follow-up to this is to prevent and reject. So in spite of your best efforts, an inappropriate appointment can still happen. And this is because abusers are often charming, persuasive, and skilled at avoiding detection. So that's why it's really vital to follow up with a rigorous induction and probation period to check that the right person has been appointed. But it doesn't stop here. The process of keeping children and vulnerable adults safe is a continuous one. And it's all about promoting a safe culture within your organisation. So following appropriate policies and procedures and raising awareness through staff training. So Liz, do you just want to continue speaking about the recruitment process?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd like to use this as a basis, as an example. So British schools in the Middle East, known as BSME, they've released an 8-stage recruitment guidance for hiring staff, which I think is it's another very robust policy that schools should consider implementing, either parts of if they don't already. And we've also added some further guidance to these stages, just offering a few practical tips. So stage 1 is the recruitment and the application, which is requiring that a scanned copy of the applicant's passport is provided with their application. If not, the application is to be rejected. And if they're working away from their own country, any residency document or further proof of identification would be useful. The second is to use an application form rather than accepting CVs. By also using standard procedures and forms, it means that your recruitment process is safer because it ensures the same standards are applied equally to everybody. It makes sure that safeguards, they aren't accidentally left out, and they allow the same standards to be applied throughout the whole recruitment process. Also, they specifically look for previous work history or gaps in employment and ask for clarification from the application. Note down names and addresses of previous work and contact the authorities in any other countries listed for further information. Schools, they should request at least 3 referees. And during stage 2, a school may also wish to request that the candidate conducts a video screening session whereby they can answer a few choice questions. So there are specific recruitment software packages designed for that purpose. And at this stage, I always think it's a good idea to run an internet and a social media search on a candidate, along with additional search terms such as name child protection and name teacher. Then we come to conducting an interview. All references, they must have been received prior to the interview taking place, and at least one of which should be from the head of the most recent school. And whenever possible, a balanced interview panel should be formed. And what I mean by this is a wide age range of both male and female interviewers. Always follow up on professional references with a phone call and ask professional references specifically about attitudes towards children and their safety. And finally, if a candidate is screened out by a background check indicating offences against children, the passport country should be notified. So if an applicant is successful, they should be contacted directly to confirm that they accept the offer of employment. Sarah, would you like to take us through the next 4 stages?
Yeah, no problem. So the job offer, which is stage 5, is forwarded to the successful candidate. And this is along with the contract, job description and relevant questionnaires. So for example, the staff disqualification declaration, disqualification under the Child Care Act, and any pre-employment health declaration. Also including further verification of identity and/or gaps in CV. And this is done as necessary. Stage 6 is the hide stage, which includes the loading of the candidate's details on the school's management information systems and the single central record or register, including relevant dates from all of the above stages. Then we have stage 7. So upon arrival in the country or before, if they're already there, the original signed job description and job offer will be collected from the new member of staff, and there will be further verification of their passport and all the police clearances and qualifications. And please note at this stage that all documents will need to be originals. And just to add to this point and to clarify, the right pre-employment and/or police checks to use will depend on an employee's nationality and where they have previously lived or worked. All teachers working internationally should be encouraged to obtain police clearance checks from countries where they have lived or worked. And this is to ensure employers have access to accurate and relevant information. In the past, international schools have been able to access the DBS checks. This is the UK Disclosure and Barring Service checks. And these were formerly known as the CRB checks. So this was for staff who had ever lived in the UK, but this is no longer the case, except where the recruitment decisions are made in the UK. And this change in practice came about in 2018 following a review of existing legislation by the UK Home Office. And similarly with the barred list checks, formerly again known as the List 99, are only available for those who have applied and are waiting for an enhanced DBS check. So with this and with the seizing of the international DBS access, barred list checks are also not available for international schools. So this position has recently been clarified by the DBS, and it is working to update inspectorates and agencies that may still be requiring or offering these checks. So Liz, can you talk us through the ICPC?
Yeah, of course. So whilst this move from the UK Home Office, it might seem like a backward step when it comes to safeguarding children and young people worldwide, there are fortunately a number of comprehensive alternative checks available to international schools, including prohibition checks, which are available via COBIS, and the ICPC, which is available via ACRO Criminal Records Office. The ICPC is a criminal records check for anyone who's ever lived or worked in the UK and is seeking to work with children overseas. The ICPC provides information concerning conviction and non-conviction data, and that's including current investigations and impending prosecutions, and benefits from a number of built-in security features. Earlier this year, COBIS and ACRO announced a collaboration to encourage more international schools to access the ICPC. Reflecting on the partnership, COBIS CEO Colin Bell said, COBIS is committed to safeguarding and promoting the welfare of children, young people and adults, and we are pleased to be able to work with ACRO as Global ICPC Ambassador to encourage all international schools to follow best practice in safer recruitment. The ICPC is an invaluable resource for schools looking to safeguarding the children and young people in their care. Okay, so we come to the final stage, stage 8. A rigorous induction procedures. They must include safeguarding children, child protection, including policies and procedures, introduction to the safeguarding team, staff behaviour policy, which is sometimes known as code of conduct, health and safety, and all that entails within the school, any other key policies and procedures, and professional and organisational expectations related to both their wider and individual roles. During this time, observation and supervision should be conducted, as all staff should have a direct line manager. And it may be worth mentioning at this point, international schools see more staff transition than in other schools, which does generate more handover when it comes to safeguarding. As staff get to know pupils, they learn a huge amount about their personal history and circumstances. Those niggles picked up by staff that seem like reasonably small concerns can amount to much more if the dots between them are connected. However, when a member of staff moves on and a new one starts, it becomes much harder to reconnect those dots. So all concerns, no matter how small, they must be recorded in a way that's really easy to collate and review by the safeguarding team. So when a new member of staff starts, the designated safeguarding lead must communicate their induction and relevant history with them. And the key word here is relevant. So that means anything that can help pick up new concerns if they appear without compromising the privacy of that history. And if using an agency for recruitment, ensure that they're providing candidates with a full employment history and no gaps at all, and all relevant police checks. So examine your school policy around safe recruitment and the regularity of vetting eligible employees and volunteers. Okay, so what we have on this slide very quickly, there are just some relevant links that did relate to the previous 8 stages, but we'd also like to let you know that this will be made available to you after the webinar today.
Okay, yeah, thanks for that, Liz. Sorry about that. I just had some technical issues there. Looking now at policies and law, and these are there to make sure that everyone is treated fairly. So safer recruitment can present a particular challenge for the international school sector. And this is evident, in fact, in the fact that teaching staff come from a range of nationalities and that they may have an employment history that stretches across various countries and continents. There are also issues around the availability of police checks and pre-employment checks, as mentioned above. These can vary significantly from country to country. So the changes that we have compounded by the fact that the schools within the international sector have sometimes been perceived as a soft target by individuals who should not be working with children, means it is vitally important for schools to have robust recruitment policies and vetting processes in place. It's important at this point to consider when you're recruiting and make sure that you strike the right balance between being safe on one hand and not being discriminatory on the other, while at the same time staying within the law. So you will need to have written policies which cover recruitment and take account of the relevant laws in your country. So there are 3 main types of policies that you should have. So the first is a safer recruitment policy. And this is vital for any organisation that employs staff or volunteers to work with children. So your policy should include measures to prevent unsuitable people from gaining access to your pupils. And it's a good idea to include a statement about your commitment to safeguarding in this policy. And this could be included in all your written and online materials involved in your recruitment recruitment process. So an example policy statement could be as seen on the slide. So this organisation is committed to safeguarding and promoting the welfare of learners and expects all staff and volunteers to share this commitment. So the second one is equality and diversity. So the Equality Act means that you mustn't unlawfully discriminate against people on the basis of their age, disability, gender reassignment, marriage and civil partnerships, pregnancy and maternity, race, religion or belief, sex or sexual orientation. And having this policy covering equality and diversity really reflects your commitment to equal opportunities. So it is your promise to treat all employees and potential employees fairly and considerately.
You should also have a rehabilitation of offenders policy. So as part of the DBS Code of Practice, any employer using DBS checks or the equivalent must have a policy on the recruitment of ex-offenders. So the Rehabilitation of Offenders Act, it gives people with spent convictions the right not to disclose them when applying for most jobs. However, it's important to know that where work involves contact with children and young people, all previous convictions must be declared. And finally, a whistleblowing policy will enable members of staff to raise concerns internally and in a confidential fashion about fraud, malpractice, health and safety, criminal offences, miscarriages of justice, and failure to comply with legal obligations, inappropriate behaviour or unethical conduct. The policy also provides, if necessary, for such concerns to be raised outside the organisation, and it will encourage staff to report suspected wrongdoing as soon as possible, in the knowledge that their concerns will be taken seriously and investigated appropriately, and their confidentiality will be respected, but also to provide staff with guidance as to how to raise their concerns and to reassure staff that they should be able to raise genuine concerns without fear of reprisals, even if they do turn out to be mistaken. So it's important to have these policies written down so that it's clear to everyone what's expected of them and everyone follows the same rules. It's not only important to have written policies, but also standard forms and procedures. They not only save time, but they also make sure that nothing gets missed. So Sarah, would you like to introduce us to the single central record? I'm not sure if Sarah's having any technical issues, so what I'm going to do
Sorry,
actually.
can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Perfect. Sorry about this. Okay, so schools and colleges must keep a single central record or register. The single central record stores information about the checks that have been done for each person and when they were completed. So all staff need to be included, but I have put a few on this slide just to really emphasise that this now includes some staff members that were not previously included. So firstly, teacher trainers on a salaried route. So where applicants for initial teacher training are salaried by the school or college, they must ensure that all necessary checks are carried out. So as trainer teachers are likely to be engaging in regulated activity, all relevant checks must be completed and certificates obtained. The next we have supply staff. So schools and colleges must obtain written notification from any agency or third-party organisation that they use. And this is to prove that they have carried out the checks on the individual who will be working at your school or college. Then we have volunteers. So under no circumstances should a volunteer be left unsupervised or allowed to work in regulated activity if no checks have been obtained. So for governors or proprietors that also work as a volunteer, then the same applies to them as the volunteer role. Then we have relatives or guardians. So all activity on the school premises must and or should be supervised where possible. Visitors and contractors. So this may be a visiting educator or a cleaner, maintenance person around the site. So schools and colleges should ensure that any contractor or an employee of the contractor who is to work at the school or college has been subject to the appropriate level of checks. And if no checks have been obtained, then the contractor must not have any unsupervised work. So looking at this, we have learnt that the single central record really is crucial to ensure that all employees are thoroughly vetted during the recruitment process in order to protect every child at your school. And the checks required through will depend on the type of establishment and the position of the employees. So electronic system would be beneficial as it would automatically lead you through the correct checks. Guidance through these checklists will ensure that complacency does not cause standards to slip and therefore helps to maintain the reputation of your establishment, which obviously is really crucial and important. So it is part of the role of a governor, proprietor, to regularly check that the single central record is being maintained, kept updated, and that these checks are recorded for inspection purposes. So along with all the necessary checks that need to be carried out, we also want to look at and consider the introduction and the probationary period of the candidate. And this is to any potential cultural differences, just to ensure that everybody is protected. So Liz, can you explain to me and the rest of everybody why this is so important?
Yeah, of course. It's a really, really important question to consider because to some people, a parent disciplining their child physically is a strong telling off, whereas to others it's abuse. So whilst this example is really blunt, it does set the tone for a huge range of differences in how staff from across the world see things differently to parents at home. Children being told to perform different chores at home, varying customs and unusual punishments they're really just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to cultural differences that raise questions about safeguarding. All school staff, they must be aware of local family lifestyles so that incidents that should raise more than an eyebrow, they are dealt with accordingly. And a safe rule here is to record everything that could potentially be connected to pastoral care within the local guidelines set out in your school's child protection policy. Child abuse, it is an invisible epidemic that has serious short and long-term ramifications for the affected children, their families and societies at large. Making a diagnosis that suggests or confirms child abuse can be challenging because many medical conditions resemble child abuse, and cultural healing practices often result in the appearance of child maltreatment. So cultural healing practices are described, including coining, cupping, gaucher, moxibustion, and caída de molera. Many of these cultural approaches are ancient practices that still exist today. Also, certain birth markings may present in a manner that suggests child abuse. So to ensure an accurate differential diagnosis, the importance of being culturally sensitive and aware of specific belief systems and practices of cultural groups is really underscored throughout. Similar to culture clashes, what may seem to be unlawful to staff in some international schools may be locally considered above board. So where you feel there's a difference between the law and the school's responsibility to safeguard pupils, you need to do all that you can to build a framework of evidence in school and offer suitable support to those who need it. So a really important question is to ask as a school, are you doing enough to consider this? So Sarah, I think this leads us really well into talking about supporting staff. And what I can do is just continue if there's an audio issue. So I'm going to continue reading. So just looking at the slide, depending on where in the world you are, there are varying degrees of support available from different agencies. However, it can't be taken as a given that a large number of these other agencies, educational psychologists, speech therapists, counsellors, etc., it can't be taken that they mean a more solid safeguarding approach. And often, in some cases, more involvement can mean more gaps in communication as not all of the details are passed on. So it needs to be made paramount that every incident of information is recorded somewhere accessible by the school's safeguarding lead, just so that all the dots can be connected and the child's holistic situation is reviewed. And due to the nature of international and independent schooling, there sometimes isn't quite the same quantity or nature of concerns faced by mainstream schools in any country. So the challenge then presents itself. If you have few safeguarding concerns, how can you prove that is an accurate reflection of your school cohort and not a reflection of poor safeguarding record keeping? So you need to ensure that your observation of potential issues and record keeping itself is completely solid, and all staff must know your recording procedures and they must be reviewed regularly. A recording or monitoring system featuring a filing cabinet on one side of the school, and in another corner is a disused office and an online email folder, that creates uncertainty about the strength and the precision of the system. So I'd like to just explain on this slide about remaining vigilant. There's quite a few points here to consider. So the first is having clear safeguarding policies and procedures and ensure that all staff and volunteers are aware of them and they understand them. Then the next is setting acceptable standards of behaviour, followed by having clear procedures for reporting concerns, ensuring everybody knows what they are and that they're responsible for following them. And that really feeds into the bottom line that safeguarding is everybody's responsibility. Then we've got taking all concerns seriously and providing support to people raising them just to prevent them from not disclosing for any reason. Then taking prompt appropriate action to any concerns raised, having robust induction arrangements, and providing safeguarding and other relevant training as part of your induction program and ongoing training on a regular basis for all staff and volunteers, which is again has been the fundamental theme throughout this webinar today, is having that training and having things that are proactive. And then keeping your commitment to safeguarding and child protection on the agenda for a regular discussion at staff meetings, presentations and training sessions. So one question I'd be quite curious to see from yourselves today is, how often do you have safeguarding meetings? How often are they planned into your school calendar? Then keeping your commitment to safeguarding and child protection on the agenda, and learn from experience and if necessary adapt your policies and procedures accordingly. One piece of advice that I'd have to give is that it may be timetabled that a policy is going to be reviewed every year, but certainly feel very welcome to update them sooner than that. They can be reactive if something does happen at the school of a serious nature. You can review them sooner than that time. And the bottom line that we've got here is never think that enough has been done to ensure a safer culture. That really does need to be emphasised. A key part of this webinar has been to emphasise that although using a safer recruitment process does get you a long way towards helping to protect vulnerable people, it really can never guarantee child safety completely, and it should be seen as part of the wider safeguarding process. New risks, they crop up every day, and a person with no prior history of abuse may suddenly abuse for the first time. And ongoing vigilance is vital, and creating a strong culture of safety throughout your school really is the best insurance policy of all. What we can do here, just to end with the few minutes that we have left, is to have a bit of a discussion, have a bit of a question and answer. So this is both an opportunity to discuss the questions that are on this slide, but it's actually also an opportunity for yourselves to ask us questions too. So please feel very welcome to ask anything of us, and any questions that we're unable to answer in this time, we will receive those questions at the end of today's webinar, and we will ensure that we do get in contact with you later on. So Sarah, I'm not sure if your audio is okay. I just wanted to start off with the first question. What would prevent you from whistleblowing?
Hi Liz, yeah, sorry about that. I'm just having some difficulties here. The joys from working from home, so apologies about that. Okay, so what would prevent me from whistleblowing? Well, if we look at, imagine you were one of our Hayes colleagues, he managed to work in so many schools for several years. So when we think about what would prevent me, what stopped his colleagues from coming forward? Some of them obviously had those, concerns about him that did come forward once, that obviously he'd been arrested. So in terms of disclosing a concern about a member of staff, could I ask you what would stop you, Liz, when we think about, the Vahe series case review?
What would stop me would be a lack of knowledge about the protecting me, protecting the pupil in question, maybe even protecting the teacher themselves in case I've got worries perhaps, but they might not be founded just yet. I have a concern, but I don't know what's going to happen. Is that staff member going to be instantly fired based on that presumption? So I think it would be if there's not policies in place to protect everybody. I'd be worried certainly about not being believed, maybe even reprimanded or fired for my own disclosure. And perhaps maybe I might worry that the children aren't protected either. That is not necessarily, I'm not sure what's going to be the next step.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. We have had just a couple of questions that have come through, and one being about the software that guides users through the single central register entry process. Now, this would be something that, would you be able to touch on, Liz, in terms of our MyConcern database and the Sentry?
Yeah, of course. So this year we did release a software platform called Sentry, and this is specifically designed to take all members of the school right the way through the single central register process. It's really an exceptional piece of software, and there's going to be more details available to you after this webinar today. But essentially, it sets out all the legal framework and all the standards that are necessary to put in regards to the checks, and it already has preset lists as well. what I might ask to do actually is if we do release that information after today's webinar.
Yeah, I would
just to
ensure
provide.
I'll ensure it goes out in a follow-up email so everyone will receive that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, fantastic. Centra is such a fantastic system, and would be really valuable to many of these people that have joined today. So yeah, if we can get that sent to everybody, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah. I was just thinking I could talk about it forever. I really could, so I have to be aware of what point do I stop.
Anything that you feel is necessary, tell them now. This is your opportunity, Liz.
So one of the questions that I really think is a really important and appropriate question to consider is, we've talked about harm to pupils today in quite a few different instances, and you can see one of the questions at the bottom here is, think of separate examples of unintentional and intentional harm that could take place in a school or college, because I think it's really important to consider the whole spectrum of harm that can come to a pupil. So Sarah, I'm not sure if you'd like to share any thoughts on that question.
Well, I think for me, when I think about intentional harm or unintentional, I just want to give you a few, scenarios here that I believe, would fall into this. So intentional harm possibly could be looking at humiliating a child for their appearance or race, religion and beliefs. Creating and acting on plans to get a child alone, such as after school clubs, lunchtime detentions, and giving them a lift home, and this is with the view to abuse. And then you've got unintentional. So again, just a few points to cover on this. So, being over friendly with a pupil, completely in a platonic way, such as engaging over social media, it skews the necessary boundaries needed in that teacher-pupil relationship. Unintentional again, being ignorant of a pupil's culture and belief. And this is again why we touched on that cultural clashes and why it's so important, to really get a good understanding of where you're, moving to. And again, the school and the ethos that surrounds that. Another one would be, being unaware of an individual need of the child, looking at allergies or physical disabilities. Is there anything more that you want to add on that, Liz?
Just to consider about that, well, I do have an example actually of unintentional harm, and it does involve a relationship that was formed between a learning assistant at a school I was aware of, where the learning assistant was 19 and the pupil was 17, and the learning assistant was unaware of the severity of his actions, and he thought it was okay because the pupil was above the age of 16. So I feel like that's an example of where harm has occurred. With just sort of a lack of, and perhaps maybe the induction process really could have solidified that. Perhaps maybe they didn't want to have that awkward conversation of, this must not happen at this school. But if that conversation didn't happen, then it led to a slight area of ignorance.
Yeah, absolutely. We've had another question coming actually about what are the safeguarding implications of staff offering private tutoring after school hours? Now, this needs to be a lot of discussion between yourself and the school, and looking at your policies and procedures as to what you have in place for this. Certainly, there would be much need for a risk assessment around this. How the private tutoring is to be conducted. So things like, if this is online, you would need to ensure that the child is in an area of so sort of not in their bedroom, and that that their families are around them also. And again, for yourself, thinking about your situation and where you're placed within the house. And this is all if it's online. If this is face to face, again, it's ensuring that you've got that contact with their parents, and kind of just making sure there's some rules and boundaries put in place for that as well. But I do think you would need to speak to your school directly, and again, refer to those policies and procedures as to what you have. Certainly within the UK, and looking at staff offering that tuition outside of school, it would be something that would possibly brought into the school. So you would sort of have, here we have after school clubs and different things like that. So possibly in terms of offering private tutoring, it wouldn't automatically happen within the UK. It would be something that would be still done through the school. And again, you know, quite a heavy risk assessment would be put in place to cover that. But you know, it would also be for the parents' perspective as well, to making sure that they, you know, that they are comfortable and that they see all your clearance checks as well. So there's many things to consider, and that would why, you know, it would be important to have that conversation with the school and how comfortable each person is within this situation. Yeah, so and another comment is this is also true for learning at home. So we set procedures and expectations to parents and children for learning at home with guidelines. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's very true. You know, looking at suitable dress, appearance, where they're located, will they have any distractions around them? So there's so much to think about. But I know it will be different for each school, and you know, and how they want to operate that. So again, just make sure that you are having that conversation. Everybody's aware as well is really important when this tutoring is taking place, what times, and that there also is some sort of almost like a feedback after each lesson as well. You know, what's been learned, what you've discussed. It's all about, you know, keeping that documentation up to date. But yeah, have that conversation with the school.
Yeah, I think that's a really good example of preventing any kind of assumptions from being made that there is a difference at all in how they can, you know, be conducted at home.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And just looking, and I think we've actually had another question here. But I just need clarification. The question is, so how often must we train our staff? If this is in terms of safer recruitment, there should always be somebody safer recruitment trained within your school. And they should be able to run through the training internally. And this can be done at sort of inset days. But this will all form part of your general safeguarding procedures anyway in place. So yeah, so if that's based around the safer recruitment, this sort of training will come from your safer recruitment lead anyway within the school. But it is best to be sort of running any training annually with some regular updates coming throughout the year as well.
I think that's probably all we've got time for, both. We are just about 5 past the hour. Thank you so much for all of your incredible resources and stories that you have shared. I will ensure that this presentation is forwarded to everyone, so everyone is able to click through the links and follow everything up. A few things from me is that ECIS, we do actually have child protection qualifications for your staff. So just going back to that question around kind of how often should we train the staff, we do have kind of level 2 certificates for the staff, and I will make sure that we include all of that in the follow-up emails. And just another few things to look out for is that we work very closely with ICMEC. I know Sarah and Liz, you did kind of point out their resource, which is incredibly useful, their education portal. But we do have a few workshops coming up with them kind of to support healthcare professionals and people in the group, as well as lots of other different webinars as well. So I will make sure I share those as well. So lots of things that we can be sharing, and I will make sure everything gets out to you all. But thank you so much, Sarah and Liz, once again for your time today. It was incredibly useful, and thank you to all for attending this afternoon.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, I just want to also say a big thank you for everybody attending today. We hope that you have found it useful and that you will be able to take something back from this. And I think that's the main thing, is that, you know, we all go back with that stronger knowledge of, you know, creating that safer culture within our schools.
Yeah, I think all I can do is just echo that sentiment and just say thank you very much for being here today.
Thank you both. Thank you all for attending. Bye now.
Okay, thank you.